Hi everybody, I'm Carolyn. I'm the Children's Librarian at Battersea and York Gardens Libraries in Wandsworth, London, United Kingdom. And welcome to another online story time. Today's story time is a special one for Black History Month, and all October long, Wandsworth Borough is celebrating Black History Month with online events for children, teens, and grown-ups too. I'll leave a link with this video to the full schedule of events. Make sure to check them all out. And as usual, we have our online rhyme times on Facebook Live Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. with a different children's librarian every day. So make sure you don't miss those as well by following us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Today, I am sharing a story about my special guest here. Now, if you've visited Battersea and York Gardens Libraries in previous Octobers, you might have met my friend, who is of course a giant spider. Do you remember his name? Any guesses? His name is Anansi. And you might recognize that name because he's very famous. As you can see, we have all sorts of Anansi stories in the library catalog. I'll leave a link to that as well if you want to take any of them home. But Anansi stories originated in Africa and the Caribbean. But just as the people of Africa and the Caribbean have traveled, have emigrated to different places, their stories have gone with them too, including Anansi stories. Originally, stories traveled through word of mouth. In most cultures, before there was written language or the ability to write stories down, people told them to each other, had to remember them, and then told them to someone else. And that's how stories moved forward in time and over space as well. Now, since then, we've written stories down so that we can remember them a little bit better, but it's still quite fun to return to the origins of storytelling, which are oral, using our voices. Because when you are telling a story with just your voice, it's really important as both the teller and the listener to use one very special ingredient: your imagination. Do you have your imaginations with you today? Oh good, I bring mine with me everywhere, just in case. I'm also going to use a few very basic props, but you could probably find these or something similar around your house if you want to tell this story, or if you make up your own story with different bits and bobs you find around the house. I love to see or hear about you practicing your oral storytelling too. Now, if you know Anansi, you might know that he also loves stories, so it's just perfect for today, but he's also a bit of a mischief maker. He likes to play tricks on people, and this story is about those two things, stories and trickery. And it's based on a book called Anansi Does the Impossible by Verna Aardema and Desimin, but it's of course itself based on this long history of storytelling about Anansi. We begin a long, long time ago, before people wrote down stories, even before people told stories to each other. In fact, at this time, there were no stories in the world at all. And that is because the sun god was keeping them all to himself. Now, does that seem fair? No. At the library, we like to share stories, don't we? And Anansi agreed. So he was thinking one day, he said, I'm just gonna go and take the stories from the sun god. And Anansi's wife laughed and said, Anansi, you can't just take something from a god. And Anansi said, well, then I will trick him into giving me his stories. And Anansi's wife laughed again. She said, you can't trick a god, they're far too clever. But Anansi was very clever too. So he skittered up to the sun god and he said, sun god, give me your stories. What do you think the sun god said? No. Anansi realized he forgot to say a very important word. Please. He said, please, sun god, please, please, please give me your stories. What do you think the sun god said? No. So Anansi said, I'll pay you for your stories. And what do you think the sun god said? No. What could you, a spider, have that a sun god could possibly want? No way, Anansi. So Anansi said, please, sun god, I promise you I can do the impossible. Ask me for any impossible thing and I will bring it to you. And if I do, then will you give me your stories? And what do you think the sun god said? He thought. He kind of wanted to see what this famous trickster Anansi was up to. So he said, "Fine. You get me these 3 impossible things, and I will give you my stories." And the 3 impossible things were, number 1, the longest, fiercest, most poisonous snake in the whole wide world. 2, a real-life fairy. And 3, 80 hornets. Now, do you think Anansi can do those 3 impossible things? Let's find out. So the first impossible thing was the longest, fiercest, most poisonous snake in the whole wide world. And Anansi went home to his wife and told him about the bargain with the sun god. And she said, "Well, Anansi, we know the longest, fiercest, most poisonous snake in the whole wide world. Onini. You know the one, she's very boastful." Does anyone know what boastful means? It means she's very proud. She brags a lot about herself, and she just thinks she's better and longer and fiercer and more poisonous than anyone else in the world. So Anansi went down to the river, and there he saw Onini. Check that out. Does that look like a snake? No? I don't think you've turned your imaginations on. All right, I want you to close your eyes and imagine the longest, fiercest, most poisonous snake in the whole wide world. And 3, 2, 1, open your eyes. What a scary snake. And Onini was lazing down by the river saying, "I'm so long, I'm so fierce, I'm so poisonous, I'm the best." And Anansi said, "You don't look that fierce." And she said, "Watch me." And she showed her fangs. And he said, "You don't look that poisonous." And she said, "Watch me." And she bit a passing mouse and died. And he said, "You don't look that long." And she stretched herself out as long as she could. And Anansi looked and he said, "I don't even think you're as long as this log." Now, does that look like a log to you? Actually, it's not bad. I don't think you need to use your imagination too much. Now, which one do you think is longer? So Onini laid herself down by the log to prove that she was longer, but she was very wiggly, and Anansi said, "Here, let's tie you down so we can measure you against the log." And Onini really wanted to prove how long she was, so she let Anansi tie her to the log. And then, which one's longer? Well, Onini is longer, but she was trapped to the log. And so Anansi had caught the longest, fiercest, most poisonous snake in the world. And he brought it back to the sun god, who was surprised, but not worried, for Anansi still had to capture 2 more impossible things. And the second thing was a real-life fairy. Did you know that fairies exist? Yes, you did. Okay, good. So we've overcome that hurdle. They exist. Anansi just needs to figure out how to capture one. So he went home to his wife and told her about the bargain with the sun god. And his wife said, "Well, you know, there's a village of fairies just down the road, but they're very, very shy, so I don't know how you could catch one." But together, she and Anansi came up with a plan, and they carved a fairy out of wood. There we go. How does this fairy look? It's got all the things a fairy needs: knobbly knees and purple prickles and orange eyes. Sounds like a fairy, right? Not quite? All right, I think we need to use those imaginations again. So I want you to close your eyes and picture the most majestic, beautiful fairy you can, with beautiful, sparkling wings and magic pixie dust. And 3, 2, 1, open your eyes. Is it a beautiful fairy? It is. Good job. Now Anansi took his pretend fairy and he covered it with tree sap. Now, has anyone ever felt tree sap? What does it feel like? It's quite sticky. So he had this sticky fairy doll. What's he going to do with that? Well, he took it to the fairy village and he set it just outside. And like Anansi's wife said, the fairies were very shy and they did not like strangers. So one of the fairies peeked out, seeing this strange new doll, and said, "Go away, stranger." course, the fairy doll didn't move. And so other fairies joined, and they said a bit louder, "Go away, stranger." But of course, the fairy doll didn't move. And so all the fairies of the village gathered around and said as loud as they could, "Can you be the fairies with me? Say it as loud as you can. Go away, stranger." Well done. But still, of course, the fairy doll didn't move. Well, the leader of the fairies, she was so angry that the stranger was just standing there outside their village that she flew towards it and tried to push the fairy doll away. But of course, when the fairy flew into the doll, what do you think happened? She got stuck. Her beautiful wings got stuck in the tree sap all over the fairy doll. And so, Anansi had done the second impossible thing. He had captured a real life fairy. So he took that back to the sun god, and now of course the sun god was starting to get really worried. But never mind, Anansi still had to do one more impossible thing, and that was to get 80 hornets. Now this actually might seem the easiest to you, but Anansi was very, very afraid of hornets. And he went back to his wife and said, "How am I going to capture all these hornets without getting stung?" Well, Anansi's wife said, "There's a hive just down the road the other way from the fairies. And if there's one thing we know about hornets, it's that they hate rain." So Anansi and his wife came up with an idea, and Anansi took a calabash. Do you know what a calabash is? It's like a dried gourd or fruit that's scooped out, and you can use it to carry water. It's a container for water, basically. Now, this isn't exactly a calabash, is it? That's your standard mug. I think we're going to need to use our imaginations again. So I want you to close your eyes and picture a fruit or a bowl or a basket or any kind of thing you can imagine that's big enough to hold 80 hornets. And 3, 2, 1, open your eyes. There we go, our giant calabash. So Anansi took this giant calabash to the hive, and he dumped the water over the hive. Now, what do you think the hornets thought was happening? They thought it was raining, and they said, "Rain, rain, go away, come again another day. Bees need to work, not play. Rain, rain, go away." And Anansi said, "Hornets, come here. I'll keep you safe and dry in my calabash." And so all 80 hornets, I only have 10 hornets. Can you show me your hornets? Very good. Now together we have 20. We'll add a few more people. Look at that. We've got 80, maybe even more hornets going bzzz. And all the hornets went bzzz into Anansi's calabash, and Anansi put a lid on. And now he had captured 80 hornets. So he took his hornets, his real life fairy, and his very poisonous snake back to the sun god, and he said, "I've done 3 impossible things. Now, may I have your stories?" And what do you think the sun god said? He had to say yes. He didn't want to. He was very angry, but a god must stick to his bargain. So he said yes, and he gave Anansi his stories. Now, do you think Anansi kept all the stories to himself, like the sun god? No, of course not. Anansi wanted to share the stories. So he thought really hard about a place that he could bring all the stories so that everyone, all the boys and girls and people and animals around the world could share stories. Where do you think he brought them? To the library. You're right. And so libraries always, if you look very closely, will have a little spider there watching over the stories and making sure everyone is sharing. And that's the story of Anansi Does the Impossible, or where stories came from. There are so many different stories about the fun things Anansi does, and I know a song that we sing at rhyme time often about Anansi, and it's about Anansi playing some drums. Now Anansi, how many legs does Anansi have? Let's count them. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 legs, just like any other spider. So, I think that means Anansi could play 8 drums. We'll start with the first one, and it goes like this. Anansi plays with 1 drum, 1 drum, 1 drum. Anansi plays with 1 drum. Then he plays with 2, 1, 2. Anansi plays with 2 drums, 2 drums, 2 drums. Anansi plays with 2 drums. Then he plays with 3, 1, 2, 3. Anansi plays with 3 drums, 3 drums, 3 drums. Anansi plays with 3 drums. Then he plays with 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Anansi plays with 4 drums, 4 drums, 4 drums. Anansi plays with 4 drums. Then he plays with 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anansi plays with 5 drums, 5 drums, 5 drums. Anansi plays with 5 drums. Then he plays with 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anansi plays with 6 drums, 6 drums, 6 drums. Anansi plays with 6 drums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then he plays with 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Anansi plays with 7 drums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 drums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 drums. Anansi plays with 7 drums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then he plays with 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Anansi plays with 8 drums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 drums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 drums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Anansi plays with 8 drums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then he goes to sleep. Good night, Anansi. Oh, I'm tired after playing all those drums. Excellent counting. We'll end with one last spider song, and that's, of course, about the itsy bitsy spider. Ready? The itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sunshine and dried up all the rain. And the itsy bitsy spider climbed up the spout again. Beautiful job. And if you are joining me for Friday's 10 a.m. rhyme time, it is going to be all about the letter I and itsy bitsy spiders. And Anansi will be joining me because it is, of course, Halloween. So we'll sing some spooky songs together. Thank you so much for joining me in this story time. Again, make sure to check out our full schedule of Black History Month events. If you missed some earlier in the month, you can watch most of them on Facebook or YouTube. So make sure to follow us there and on Twitter, and you won't miss a thing. And don't forget, you can come into Battersea and York Gardens libraries to browse and borrow. We have our new limited hours and services, and do ask that you wear a face covering unless you are exempt. So I'll leave more information about our current services with this video. So have a wonderful week, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.